Hello there, everybody, and hello there, and welcome to tonight's reading, once again hosted by the Holding Cell, Roz and Simon Lewis, those very kind people who managed to put all of this together. And tonight's reading is, and welcome to my living room, by the way. There's room for all of us, I think. Tonight's reading is from my second novel, which is called A Name for Himself. And what I had intended to do over the next few weeks, for however long our incarceration lasts, I'd like to give people just a taster of some of the novels that I've had published. So what I'll be doing is reading short enough extracts twice a week. And then if people have questions that they would like to ask, I will certainly do a Q&A at some stage as well. So this is my second novel. It was shortlisted many, many years ago for the Novel of the Year at Listowel Writers' Week. And it's the story of obsession, of an obsessive love between a young man called Farrell and the object of his affection, a young woman called Grace. It's a story not just about the obsessive love which he feels, but also the difference in class. And it's set in the Dublin of almost 30 years ago. So when Vinnie Farrell, when he meets Grace, he falls head over heels immediately, and she is the daughter of his employer, who doesn't like him and whom Vinnie doesn't like. So trouble ahead. So this is the first day that they manage to spend together, and Farrell can't believe his luck. The rest of that day was like moving underwater. Farrell found everything around him slow and dreamy. They wandered together through Francis Street and the Coombe, in and out of cramped and crowded little antique shops. When they went for lunch, Farrell drank coffee. Grace had a glass of wine. He didn't want anything to alter the way he felt. If this was all there was, then he wanted to remember it like this forever. Leaving the pub, crossing the road, Grace slipped her hand through his arm. It was a natural gesture, protecting herself from the now noisy traffic. Farrell was afraid to move, afraid to acknowledge the touch in case she suddenly realized what she had done. Her hand filled his mind again with racing impossibilities. He wanted to shield her, to protect her from more than traffic. Before Farrell knew it, it was nearly 6 o'clock. He began to feel ill. Now she really would go. How was he going to survive the rest of the day without her? The thought of losing her back to her father, to her Saturday night social life, to probable boyfriends, filled Farrell with an anxiety that felt almost like rage. Fear made him reckless. Are you in a hurry home? No, she was uncertain. Are you? No, I'd like to buy you dinner to celebrate the beautiful table we've just bought. I can't wait to get started on it. I'd love to, but dinner's on me, she said. You've already saved my father 200 quid. Now let's enjoy spending some of it. He argued with her, and she argued back good-naturedly. It diffused some of the tension between them. Farrell's senses were on edge, as though he were in the presence of electricity. Eventually, she won. Next time, she said. It can be your treat next time. Farrell almost wept with happiness. They settled on Chinese, another hopeful sign. Farrell loved Chinese food. Maybe he could cook it for her someday. He loved cooking, loved the ritual of shopping and elaborate preparation. He would make something special to show her how well he would care for her, if she would only give him the chance. Inside the restaurant was cool and dimly lit. Farrell had never been there before. He was a little nervous at first, afraid that he would knock something over with his elbow, or that he would suddenly lose the power of speech. But they were shown to their table without incident. and the atmosphere between them was not disturbed. Gradually, he began to relax and enjoy his surroundings. Everything on the table was gleaming. Stiff white linen cloths, dark green napkins, plates of food arrived and disappeared without fuss. Only the growing murmur of conversation indicated that the room was filling up. Grace's eyes were shining in the candlelight. The waiter had just brought hot, moist towels and they cleaned their fingers. She cupped her hands around her wine glass. Well, what's the verdict? Farrell made a circle with his thumb and forefinger. Great. I really enjoyed it. Are you going to tell me why you don't use your first name? Whatever he had expected, it was not that. Farrell was at a loss for words. How to tell her without revealing too much of his life before her. He was suddenly frightened, a Rubicon to be crossed. But her expression was so kind that he knew he could not pull back, not now. My first name is Vincent. It was my father's name, and I didn't want to be called after him. Farrell had acknowledged that aloud only once before, many years before Grace. He felt a mixture of pain and relief, of opening up and salving old wounds at the same time. Why not? Because he was a bully and a drunk. I always hated him. The life he led my mother killed her. I wanted nothing to do with him. When did she die? When I was 10. She was never strong. 5 kids in 9 years, a waster of a husband, no money to speak of. She had a dog's life. So what happened to the family? I grew up very quick. We all looked after one another. We had to. The day after my mother died, my father went missing for weeks. When he came home, he was broke and filthy. He couldn't even remember where he'd been. Then he went on one almighty bender that lasted on and off for 5 years. Farrell searched her face quickly for clues, for signs of disgust, contempt, but there were none. She was leaning closer to him, listening as she had listened in the shop. Go on, she said softly. He died in December 1967, exactly 5 years to the day after her. Then the social workers came and the other kids were taken into care. And what about you? I was 15, nearly 16. I basically hid out with neighbours until they gave up looking for me. Our neighbour, Mr. Casey, started taking me out on jobs with him. He was a cabinet maker, a real old-fashioned craftsman, a hard taskmaster. He got his employers to take me on, me and a couple of other no-hopers. He made carpenters out of the lot of us. Didn't you go to school? Farrell shook his head angrily. I hated school then. Brothers worrying about the margins in your copies when you hadn't even had breakfast. Back in primary, there was one, Brother McCormack, who tried to break me. He beat me until my hands blistered, but I wouldn't cry for him. After that, I never felt the same about it. I just couldn't see the point. But I went more or less regularly until my father died. Then I gave up. What about your brothers and sisters? Farrell stopped for a moment and sipped at his wine. She had stirred emotions he had thought long dead. All the anger, all the guilt. The oldest and not able to protect anybody. 3 brothers, 1 sister. I went to see the youngest ones once when I turned 16, and the social workers couldn't get me, but I never went back. They had a new family, a real family, a new name. I didn't want to become an embarrassment to them. The youngest was only 8. She was better off forgetting. Farrell suddenly didn't want to say any more. He was better off forgetting. It was all history. He could see by Grace's expression that she sensed his mood. She finished the conversation for him. It's a sad story, but you've come through. She smiled at him. Farrell noticed the way her face shone when she smiled. They were silent for a moment. It was getting easier each time to find the courage to speak. And what about you? He was hungry for detail, wanted to know everything about her. She shook her head, still smiling. I'll make a deal with you. You buy dinner next time and you get my story too. Farrell could feel his face glow with happiness. He felt very comfortable with her now. The churning in his stomach was stilled. He could bear anything now that she would see him again. You got yourself a bargain. Next Saturday? Next Saturday it is. It seemed natural to take her hand as they crossed the road. It was warm, reassuringly content in his. They walked back to her car. Before she opened the door, she turned to Farrell. She looked almost shy, like a girl. I had a really lovely day. Her eyes told him it was time. He reached out for her and enfolded her in his arms. Her head barely reached his chest. In the darkening street, he held her close, held on for dear life. He tilted her face towards his. He was happy and terrified at the same time. It was too soon, he knew it was much too soon, but he could no longer stop himself. I love you, Grace. She kissed him then, holding him for a long time afterwards. I know, she whispered, but I don't want to rush into anything. You'll have to give me time. She could have anything she wanted. He would give her anything. Take all the time you need. I won't change. He could have stood there for the rest of his life, right in the middle of Francis Street. He could have loved her like that forever. When they reached his flat, he kissed her again. He would not ask her in. This must not be hurried. He would wait for her, as he had promised. He was filled with the day. It was enough. So this no longer exists in print all those years later. It is on Kindle, if anybody wants to continue reading. And next Tuesday night, if I can get my technology right, Simon, I read from this, The Walled Garden, my third novel. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And once again, I want to thank Roz and Simon for having this inspired idea. And I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.